And now we're going to talk about Pioneer. You have one deck to talk about, and I also have one deck to talk
Sweet.
about.
So I'll go fast then.
I have 5 lines of notes. You have 5 pages of notes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of card text,
My friend, the floor is yours on this. So let's talk about this most hyped deck of the weekend.
Dave, I'm glad to be here. And the reason why is because I've got a pretty sick deck to talk about. I think it might be maybe the most hyped deck to come out of the first week of March of the Machine. I said it right this time. March of the Machine. And that is the Rona Herald of Invasion combo shell that's in Pioneer. And what's funny is, she doesn't really have to be a combo enabler. There are, I think, some fair applications of this card.
Yeah, now, to be clear, we talked about 2 or 3 builds of Rona decks with Devin last week on the show. Doomwake, check him out. But it does seem like people's excitement level is circling around one particular build.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Well, yeah, I think there's a central build, and there are sort of branches of that trunk, and people are trying to figure out which one will have the most fruit at the end of the branch. This is kind of a strained botanist metaphor, but yeah, I think this is the one.
Botanist is my favorite Guided by Voices album.
Oh man, I even knew you were going to do Guided by Voices, and I'm so glad.
Good job.
So glad you went there. The reason I say that it has the most potential is because I think that it has the most ways you can build off it. And I guess before we sort of talk about what those are, maybe we should just quickly talk about what the primary base combo of Rona, Herald of Invasion. She's one in the blue.
I'll read this for you. You're going to be
thank
talking
you.
a lot.
Thank
Let me
you.
give you a break.
Thank you.
Rona. This is a card that we knew was going to be in some combos, but we didn't talk about it a lot because we are not combo brewers. But here it is. Rona, Herald of Invasion. It's a generic in a blue for a legendary creature, human wizard. It's a 1/3. It says tap, draw a card, then discard a card. And then it says 5 generic, black Phyrexian. And transform Rona, da-da-da-da-da-da. Nobody cares about transforming it because of the line of text that I skipped, which says, whenever you cast a legendary spell, untap Rona, Herald of Invasion.
Yes. So legendary spells, things like other legendary creatures, planeswalkers, legendary artifacts.
Perhaps there's an artifact that we all know that's legendary.
Such as Mox Amber.
Mm-hmm. There's even an enchantment in this deck that's legendary, if you want.
Good point. And so all these decks, all these Rona decks are running Mox Amber. And so you cast Mox Amber as your primary legendary spell that untaps Rona. Okay, great, that's cool. But the third piece of this is an old Theros block card, I believe, Retraction Helix.
Yeah.
It's just a blue instant, and it reads, until end of turn, target creature gains tap, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So basically, you target Rona with a spell, typically. There are other applications, but the combo application is target Rona. You can then float mana off your Mox Amber, you tap Rona to return it to your hand, cast it again for the 0 mana, that untaps the Rona. You repeat this process over and over again, generating typically infinite blue mana, but if you have other legendary permanents, you can make other colors of mana. And then, weirdly, infinite mana lets you do a lot of random broken things.
Yeah, but what's the number one thing that people do with infinite mana in Pioneer, my friend?
You tell me. There's so many things.
There's so many things, but one of them is cast a Karn the Great Creator and get stuff with it out of their sideboard to abuse.
That's kind of the interesting wrinkle of this particular deck, is I think that there are a number of things you can do with infinite mana. You can mill yourself with cards like Diligent Excavator or something like that, right? Which is the one in the blue 1/3. Whenever you cast a historic spell, target player mills 2 cards. You can mill your opponent out, or you can mill yourself to then cast a Thassa's Oracle.
Mm-hmm.
That's another way to do it. You can mill yourself with things like Tyvar in the mix. So you can bounce your Tyvar and then recast it, mill your deck with the minus each time, and then play a Thassa's Oracle for the win. But like you said, people are again remembering Karn the Great Creator can do ridiculous things when you have access to a lot of mana. And so with this, like you said, you can cast a Karn. You can't do anything so easy like Walking Ballista any longer, but because you are casting spells over and over and over again, you can cast things like Aetherflux Reservoir, and it's a 4 mana artifact that reads whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. So yeah, great. That's great. That's great, Shane. But oh wait, there's more. You can pay 50 life, and it deals 50 damage to any target.
It's a big reservoir.
It's a big.
You got to fill it, and then you're going to use it.
It is. That's kind of an absurd kind of visual metaphor where it's like a reservoir of 50 life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of synergies that you can do with a strategy like this. So you have a lot of mana. You can do a lot of things. People are coalescing around Sultai colors in order to get access to Tyvar, which works like it does in other creature combo decks. Lets you activate Rona at instant speed. Other creatures, of course, on the same turn they come down can be activated. It provides recursion out of your graveyard. And so we've seen some Dimir decks that have removal and hand disruption, the classic 8-pack of Fatal Push and Thoughtseize. They might be running blue cards like Jace Fringe Prodigy coming back out of the woodwork, Consider, which can populate your graveyard, help dig for necessary combo pieces, Treasure Cruise, again, to just draw cards, and then, of course, the 2 combo pieces, Rona and Retraction Helix. So we're kind of dancing around the build I actually played, and the jury is still out on the best build, but Todd Anderson, Tandy himself, of course, has been working on Rona builds early and iterating through them, and I decided to play his latest Sultai version. And what Todd's doing here is he's kind of eschewing the Thassa's Oracle kill, and he likes to be able to play Jagantha as a companion. The mill combo can already work with Excavator, without having to play like Thassa's Oracle, which has the 2 blue pips. And this deck doesn't play Excavator either, because we were talking about earlier, it uses Karn the Great Creator and his Magic Wish board for combo wins. So Todd's deck is designed around a heavy ramp package of 8 elves. It has 4 Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, which is a legendary human druid. And whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, you add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. So it kind of doubles up your elves. It also doubles up your Mox Ambers. Yeah,
this is an extremely broken-y combo card that's been hanging around for people to use for a long time.
Yeah, it's a card that we've seen in combos, right? And it's a card, but I think that it's been kind of underutilized as a value engine piece. And I think it does some pretty good work as this is just a heavy ramp enabler, and also as a legendary creature to turn on your Mox Amber without having Rona on the board, which is kind of nice. And then there are 4 Tyvar as well to help provide acceleration, because you can untap mana elves if needed. It allows you to use them the turn that they hit the battlefield, so you can actually do some bonker stuff with like Mox Amber and these elves, make a lot of mana really early on.
Yeah, and extremely importantly, Tyvar also lets you use Rona the turn that you play Rona, even with Retraction Helix, because the ability that Retraction Helix adds to Rona is an activated ability with tap. So if the creature that you target with Retraction Helix has Summoning Sickness, it can't tap to do the ability that Retraction Helix adds, just to be clear.
Yeah, which is, I'll just cut to the chase on Tyvar in this deck. That is some pretty bonkers stuff, because like if your opponent like removes your Rona, for example, like a single Tyvar hitting the battlefield can win the game, like on the spot, because you immediately are able to go off if you have the necessary pieces kind of lingering around somewhere. So that works really well.
Yeah.
There's some other interesting pieces that Todd has in this deck. He looks like he's sort of maybe testing them out, which is like a singleton Reality Chip. There are 2 Micromancer, 4 Oath of Nissa, and a single Epiphany at the Drown Yard. So these pieces do various things to kind of help you out. Like Reality Chip lets you peel through your deck pretty efficiently. There are some combos, I believe, as well that it can work with that, weren't things that I was able to really test with. But Reality Chip, of course, you can look at the top card of your library at any time, and then you can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, which is advantageous. And Micromancer is an interesting inclusion and not something that I think people saw a lot of previously. It's not really cheap at 3 and a blue, but when she ETBs, you can find either Epiphany or Retraction Helix, both of which can be win cons when you need. And you can even get the Helix to like combo off and then eventually bounce the Micromancer and recast her to go get the Epiphany as well. So she's kind of pulling double duty in redundancy. And what Epiphany does is it's a fun instant spell, X and a blue. Reveal the top X+1 cards of your library, separate them into 2 piles. The opponent chooses one pile, which goes into your hand. The other goes into your graveyard. So effectively, if you have access to infinite mana, you can reveal your whole deck and then have a Karn in both piles, which forces them to give you one of them, and then you can win from there. So Micromancer is interesting in that she's serving as a redundant copy of Epiphany and a redundant copy of Retraction Helix, and sometimes the same copy of Micromancer can be both. And then Oath of Nissa is kind of like just a decent smoothing device. It allows you to like find lands, find Rona, find Tyvar, find Karn, can fix your mana for planeswalkers if you need. You can bounce them. You can do some like cute tricks where you can use Retraction Helix to bounce the Oath of Nissa and just keep digging through your deck. It's just a nice overall value piece, I think, for sure. And the way this deck actually ends up playing out is surprisingly like another creature combo deck that features Karn and features Tyvar, and that's Devoted Druid.
Really?
So it's funny that I gravitated towards playing this deck.
A lot of people might not realize you talk a lot of negatively quite often about creature combos in Modern, but that's just because you've been there.
Yeah,
and you've been there specifically with Devoted Druid.
Yeah, and I've even talked and played the Devoted Druid decks featuring Tyvar, and there's a lot of things I like about Tyvar's addition to those decks, and there's a lot of things I like about this deck for sure. Like, I think what's cool about the combo wins in this deck are that you have a lot to do with the mana, which is kind of an issue with other creature combo decks sometimes when they're built in ways that have somewhat narrow ways for you to actually implement a infinite green, blue, whatever mana. This deck, I think, has a good amount of redundancy where it's like, hey, if I have, even if it's not infinite mana at the time, like if I have infinite ability to like be untapping or even like a few times untap my Rona and reuse her, I'm able to, like I said before, is like dig through with an Oath of Nissa or have peel a copy of Micromancer, which gets me a necessary spell that I need, which then gets me into another necessary spell that I need, and then gets me into the win through like the Epiphany plan or something like that. So there's a lot of kind of options that can find you a win, which I find really satisfying. But besides like the combo element to the deck, like this has some decent value backup plans because you have a lot of ramp, like I said earlier, from Kinnan, and the powerful tools from the Karn Wishboard. So you have like Essica's Chariot, you have Sky Sovereign, you have Cityscape Leveler. All of those can beat down pretty nicely. And then you can quickly get Jegantha onto the battlefield, and then you're swinging with a 5/5. It's also cool because Jegantha can immediately activate if you have Tyvar out for even more mana. So that's really nice as well. So
can't really use the mana for a lot of stuff, but
yeah, I mean,
but that's good.
Mana's mana.
Yeah.
And there's some other like handy Wishboard hate pieces, like always, right? You got like your Tormod's Crypt and your Stonebrain and your Filigree Silex and your Haywire Mite and a Pithing Needle, Transmogrifying Wand, Mightstone and Weakstone, and then importantly, you have an additional Mox Amber. So you can tutor up the Mox Amber to like combo off with. And you can also win, I believe, entirely without Rona with a Paradox Engine, because that costs 5 mana and reads whenever you cast a spell untap all non-land permanents you control. And so you can do a lot with this deck with like all your Mana Elves and Mox Ambers, and you can combine a Retraction Helix cast on one of those creatures to like do what Rona does, so you can bounce the Mox Amber over and over again, even without her on the board. I believe, right? Like, so you can
just untap a whole bunch of times.
Yeah, like so you cast Retraction Helix like on a Mana Elf, right? And you can bounce the Mox Amber back to you can tap the Amber for mana, bounce it back to your hand with a Retraction Helix, cast it back out, and then Paradox Engine triggers.
Right.
And
Makes
untaps
everything
it.
untap.
Yeah. So you don't even need a Rona with Paradox Engine. So like if someone Stonebrains your Rona or something like that, or Pithing Needles your Rona, you still have some interesting outs. And again, without infinite mana, Karn's doing Karn things. So you have things that aren't necessarily overly expensive. Like you're going to be fine in a value game beating down with an Esika's Chariot or casting a Sky Sovereign and crewing it and taking to the skies and trying to kill off some pieces they have on the other side of their board. And sometimes you just need like a 2-mana Stonebrain to stop another combo deck or things like that. So like you have options, which is always the real value of Karn the Great Creator in decks like this, I think.
Yeah. Well, that and being a mana sink.
And a mana sink.
The easiest mana sink.
Can stop your opponents from doing stuff with artifacts. It's just Karn secretly OP.
Oh, I don't think it's a secret.
Yeah.
Never been a secret.
Not so secret. And when I was playing this deck, Dave, I thought the combo lines came together surprisingly quickly. Like, I definitely won some games on turn 3, or I just had a good draw, and I had infinite mana, and I had a Karn. And then there were other games where, like, Kinnan was just helping me make, like, 9 mana on turn 4, and so I'm just off-valuing my opponent in these cases. So I think that there's, like, I think that's what Todd's going for with this deck, is like, hey, I want a reliable combo deck, but I also want to be able to use Karn the Great Creator and kind of the Kinnan value strategy and the Tyvar value strategy to just be able to do other things that are impactful and allow me to win games by tutoring up hate pieces or aggressive artifacts or something like that. And one thing I liked a lot is like the decision points were pretty interesting, and that's only within like just a few matches of playing this deck, honestly, where it's like I'm noticing the amount of lines and the kind of decisions you can make and the value plays that can be made with like something like Retraction Helix, where you can do something stupid where it's just like fizzle removal, but like bouncing your own permanents. So it's like a single blue mana counterspell effectively. You could, like I said, repeatedly bounce Oath of Nissa to like dig through your deck. There's even like opportunities for making a little bit of extra mana. Like, you bounce a Mana Elf with like a Tyvar in the battlefield. There's like certain lines where you can get 1 or 2 bits of mana that can actually turn the tide of the game. I saw that happen to Todd in a tournament he was playing, I think. I watched like a VOD of, and I think someone in the chat mentioned it to him. He was like, oh my gosh, like, you're the MVP. Like, just got the extra mana that Todd needed to cast a necessary spell and win from there.
Win the game.
It was great. And so, like, overall, I think the deck is still in the development stage. Like, there's people who are still doing kind of like Jace Fringe Prodigy because it's a legendary creature, I think, right? So that's a legendary?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and
right?
it's an alternate win con.
Yeah.
I think as well, and it's another looter that get through your deck if you want to. Yeah, which
that's
is nice.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that is just valuable. Like with Rona, even if you don't have her, even if you're not instantly winning with her, she's looting you through your deck. You have other ability to like be digging through your deck. If you have Jace in the deck, then that's another looter as well. So you have a lot of ability to find what you need to go off. But this one has no interaction at all, right? Like, it doesn't have any like main deck spell pierce, doesn't have fatal push, doesn't have Thoughtseize. So it's leaning
got one Haywire Might in the sideboard, and a Stonebrain and a Silex.
And like, I guess if you want to call Sky Sovereign interaction potentially,
Might Stone, Weak Stone, kills something. So.
There's some stuff. I mean, there's enough there, right? But it still does all kind of work around being able to use Karn. So like, someone Pithing Needles your Karn, you're not going to be happy about it.
No.
So I think that these decks have legs, but I think there's just so many people iterating on these variations, and they all seem to have maybe various strengths. I think that the strength of this one that Todd was going for is consistency and potential other win cons at the same time. Because I think that's a smart play. Because like we've seen glass cannon combo decks that just don't survive for very long unless they're truly ridiculous, right? Like decks like Hammer have shown us the need for these secondary and even tertiary game plans, and I think this deck can present those as well. Not necessarily anywhere near as well as Hammer can with like the construct game plan or something like that. And so I really think that these decks are in kind of the development stage, and I think the absolute best one definitely hasn't been found yet. But the question for me, and I'm guessing that you might be thinking this as well, is like, what is this deck doing that other like don't interact with me and I'm probably gonna win style decks are doing? Like we already have Greasefang, we already have Lotus Field, and I'm not entirely sure what this deck is doing that's outside of those, because besides having like Karn, right? And I don't think there's like a truly legitimate beatdown plan, because like the rest of the other, besides maybe like some Karn stuff, like, but that again relies on Karn and having decent amount of mana. Like your other creatures aren't really going to be beating down very well. And I think the other angle besides like other game plans is that it's consistent. And I think you want your combo decks to be consistent. How do we find the pieces that we need before the opponent is stopping us or they're killing us? And I think that this deck is good at that because of, like we said, the looting and the recursion of Tyvar as well. So like it can find what it needs, it can get back what it needs, and then it doesn't necessarily need to untap if you have Tyvar on the board as well. So long story short, of course, I'm initially impressed, I'm initially interested, but I don't think like the format's at risk or anything. Like this isn't like an inverter or something like that. So my grade, if we're doing sleeve, leave, heave, I'm going to give it a sleeve.
Which we are.
Sleeve minus.
Thank you.
And I think there's a realistic possibility that this is like a new real player in the format, like a new shell, sort of a devoted style combo deck, and people will figure out kind of the best shells or the shell options depending on the meta game. So I'm into it. I think it's fun. It's thinky, which I appreciate. Like it's not like I have these 2 cards or I have these 3 cards and I do one thing. I think that there's a lot of like interesting, fun lines that one can discover, and that feels cool to be like, oh, if I do this, then I make one more thing of mana, or I do this and I can bounce this back to my hand and then recast it and then do something else, and that's all like kind of like fun stuff. And I think we're barely scratching the surface, and I definitely barely scratched the surface of it in my play. So yeah, it's cool. And I think that people definitely interested in it. So I'm glad I bought those Mox Ambers like a month or so ago, and I have something to do with them.
Good timing.
Although Kinnan is not cheap, but I don't think Kinnan is like solidly a must-have for all these style of decks. Like it's in this one, but I don't know if it's going to be in all of them.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the deck. It's a good card.
Yeah, I mean it's only gonna do more cool things, I think.
Absolutely. All right, so a sleeve minus.
Yeah, sleeve minus.